2761 Cautionary Tale. Nephis and Sunny looked at each other. Ah, I don't like it. Even knowing that nothing Astarion said could be trusted, Sunny still felt intrigued. After all, they were planning on challenging the fifth nightmare while knowing nothing about it. Information about it was scarce. In fact, there was no information about it at all. The sovereigns could have known something, though. By now, Sunny had learned more about the greatest secrets of the world than they had ever learned, but that did not mean that there was no knowledge they had possessed that he did not. The original Supremes had been around for far longer than Sunny and Nephis, after all. They had hoarded knowledge like treasure, or, rather, wielded it like a weapon to build their kingdoms. Astarion, meanwhile, had been the foremost explorer and historian among them. It was no coincidence that he had visited both the Eternal City and the Nightmare Desert long before the rest of humanity discovered them. Where else had he been? What secrets had he gleaned, and what mysteries had he uncovered? It was quite a tantalizing question. So, Sunny lingered for a while, and then asked, "What makes the fifth nightmare so different? And how do you even know about it?" Astarion chuckled. "I'll admit, it seems improbable that I would know anything about the fifth nightmare. After all, no awakened from our cycle of the nightmare spell has returned from it, so, it is not like I could ask someone. Right, the phantoms who dwell within the nightmares, meanwhile, all lived long before the spell was completed." "I understand your suspicion." He looked at them quietly. "However, that does not mean that the awakened from the previous cycles did not know anything, either. If one searches diligently, finding traces that they left behind is not impossible. Granted, there is barely any of those traces left, considering the obliterating conclusions of all the previous cycles." Sunny frowned. Cycles. He understood what Astarion was talking about. Earth was not the first realm infected by the nightmare spell, in fact, it was the last. In the past, the spell had infected 5 other divine realms, giving its dwellers a chance to conquer the nightmares and find salvation, just like the humans of the war realm were fighting for their salvation now. It was just that none of those ancient people had succeeded. The Twilight Sea had been swallowed by the Dream Realm and became the Stormsia. Heart Realm was the burned forest now. A piece of the Sun Realm had become Godgrave. Moon Realm was nowhere to be found, even if Sunny suspected that Moonriver Plains had once been a part of it. And the Shadow Realm, well, Sunny had no idea who the nightmare spell would have infected there, but it had been swallowed by the Dream Realm in the end, as well. Astarion was claiming that he had discovered knowledge about the fifth nightmare in the ruins left by one of those fallen civilizations. Sunny did not know if that too was a lie, but he was willing to hear the dream spawn out. Judging by the faint smirk on Astarion's face, he must have read that thought in Sunny's mind. Shaking his head lightly, he continued to stroll around the ring of chains forming the gateway. "You should be familiar with Godgrave quite well, no? The ruins hidden inside the hollows there are what remains of a civilization that, like ours, was infected by the spell and strived to resist the encroaching nightmare. Naturally, they failed in the end, but they had achieved quite a few startling feats before succumbing to their fate. Several awakened of their cycle even became spirits, no less." He smiled. "Condemnation, Desolation, and a few others, as well. Of course, they went by different names back then, before corruption. And among the ruins of the cities where their temples stood, there were fragmented remains of the chronicle depicting their deeds. That is where I learned a few things about the fifth nightmare." Sunny looked at him incredulously. "Huh, so, according to Astarion, Condemnation had not always been a nightmare creature. That fallen deity had been a fellow human once, a carrier of the nightmare spell no different from Nephis or Sunny, no less, albeit far more accomplished. Not that it helped, in the end. What a sobering revelation. But one that could be easily believed, actually, considering that Sunny himself had once fallen prey to corruption. If not for the nature of the tomb of Ariel, he might have been a great titan now, not a supreme one. He might have been the Mad Prince. Why would the fifth nightmare be so different from the rest?" Astarion smiled. "Why wouldn't it be? After all, among all the steps on the path of ascension, the fifth one is the most profound. It is the step of attaining godhood. There is a vast abyss between those supreme and those sacred. That abyss is far greater than the gap between supremacy and all the lesser ranks combined. In fact, it is far greater than the gap between being sacred and being divine, as well. The latter is mostly a question of scale, of quantity. The former, however, has to do with the inherent quality of one's being instead." He looked at Sunny and Nephis with a wry glint in his golden eyes. "Look at you. You have only recently become supreme, and you are already barely holding on to your humanity. Can you even remember what it feels like to be mundane humans? And why would you? Your powers as supremes are already incompatible with consciousness that is mundane, and therefore human. Imagine what you must become to wield the power of a god. Astarion shrugged. How would the spell guide one to such a fundamental transformation? It is not a matter of gaining raw power or attaining a deeper mastery of your aspect. It is a matter of shedding the remains of your mortal self and being reborn as something greater. It is only natural that the fifth nightmare would be different from all the rest. Nephis frowned. So, what exactly is the difference? Astarion flashed her a smile. I am afraid I cannot answer that. Asking me to be exact is asking too much, even I am not omniscient, after all. All I know is that the fifth nightmare shares more in common with the first nightmare than it does with the rest. It involves not one, but two trials, one personal, tailored specifically to the challenger, and one collective, like they usually are. Both are unimaginably brutal, and failing either one means death. He looked up with a wistful expression. If you succeed, however, well, the spell will do its thing and help you achieve apotheosis in record-breaking time. Quite miraculous, really. His expression darkened. The problem is that there is risk involved in causing such a transformation with brute force. The changes your consciousness, your very sense of self, will undergo as a result of the fifth nightmare cannot be controlled. After all, the spell does not care if you are still yourself at the end of the nightmare. All it cares about is that you have attained a new rank. Astarion turned to Sunny and Nephis, looking at them with a dark expression. That was what destroyed the civilization of the Sun Realm, in the end. Their cycle did not end because of the nightmare creatures or because of the dream realm swallowing their world. Instead, it was the very thing that had been meant to save them that ended up becoming their doom. The Dreamspawn smiled. That's right. It was the spirits that the Sun Realm civilization had given birth to that devoured and destroyed it, in the end. Because they lost themselves to godhood. He fell silent for a second and then asked in an amused tone. Now, do you still want to challenge the fifth nightmare? 2762 Demon of Hunger. Sunny hesitated. The tale Astarion had told sounded compelling. The knowledge of how the civilization of the Sun Realm had fallen was both poignant and darkly fascinating. The information about the uniqueness of the fifth nightmare was fascinating and believable. It conformed to what Sunny had learned from Uri's, after all. He had already known that a profound transformation of one's consciousness was a necessary requirement of achieving apotheosis. It only made sense that Weaver would have designed a special trial to let the spell push its carriers to godhood. It also made sense that such a transformation would threaten the challenger's humanity and sense of self. Sunny himself had been wary of that aspect of becoming a deity, let alone of becoming one in a rushed and forceful way. However, Astarion was also personally biased against the prospect of his enemies attaining godhood, not to mention being a highly manipulative, masterful liar. So, how much could his words be trusted? Trusting him implicitly would be impossibly foolish. At the same time, simply assuming that everything he said was a lie was a sure way to end up fooled, since accomplished liars always hid their deceit between truths. In fact, those who were truly good at deception could be completely honest at times, specifically because they expected their words to be seen as lies, thus blinding others to the truth. Sunny would know, since he had mastered that particular manner of deceit all the way back at the Awakened Academy. I don't know. Why couldn't people just be honest? There was no telling which parts of what Astarion had said about the fifth nightmare were true. If Sunny were to guess, though, he would assume that most of it was. Astarion had definitely omitted some information and exaggerated the rest to make the act of challenging the fifth nightmare seem even more dangerous than it was. However, the core of it should have been true. Which did not mean that his conclusions were correct. Sunny smiled. Well, why not? After hearing you out, actually, I want to challenge the fifth nightmare even more. Astarion was striving to attain godhood without the assistance of the spell for two simple reasons. Firstly, it was because he could. He had no moral compass whatsoever, and neither did he harbor any emotional attachments to humanity. So why wouldn't an appalling creature like him choose an easier and safer path? Secondly, Astarion's grasp on his sense of self had to be tentative at best. A person driven only by hunger and ambition, unmoored from everything and everyone else, could hardly rely on something external to anchor his personhood in the storm of apotheosis. That was why he was wary of the dire trial of the spell. Sunny and Nephis were different, though. Sunny was a master of maintaining his self intact, more so than anyone else, perhaps. That was because his very nature as a shadow was formless and shapeless. As such, he had trained relentlessly to never forget himself through shadow dance, so much so that even the mists of the hollow mountains failed to erode him into nothingness. Nephis, meanwhile, was connected to billions of humans and their most ardent wishes through the longing domain. That connection itself would most likely be enough to preserve the core of her being, but even if she entered the fifth nightmare entirely stripped of her domain, she would possess an overwhelming advantage in tethering herself to her sense of self. It was her own ardent desire, her own longing, an absolute and uncompromising resolve to not only conquer the nightmare spell and destroy it, but also to it in a way she deemed worthy. It was no coincidence that she possessed that longing ability, after all, which made her soul incorruptible. So, even while choosing to believe Astarion in the matter of the fifth nightmare, Sunny did not think that it would be impossible for them to both conquer it and remain if not the same, then at least faithful to the core of what made them who they were. They did not have a lot of choices, anyway. Nephis smiled darkly. Whether we challenge the fifth nightmare or not is not for you to decide, Ghoul. However, I do have a question of my own for you. She regarded Astarion with cold contempt and then asked in a dispassionate tone. What for? What are you doing this for? Is it really for no other reason than to satiate your hunger? She shook her head. What happens after you satiate it by devouring humanity and become a minor deity, then? Are you going to rule over a pile of corpses, all alone in an empty world? Or are you intending to surrender yourself to corruption and become one of the profane gods of the nightmare? Nephis pursed her lips. You know about the forgotten god, it seems. That means that you must know that he will wake from slumber one day, destroying all of existence. Do you truly not intend to challenge the trials of the nightmare spell to stop him? Astarion studied her with a wry smile for a while, keeping silent. Eventually, he chuckled. That was more than one question, I would say. Still, allow me to answer. Why not? Walking up to them, he faced Nephis and looked down at her. You questions, I'd say that they betray a lack of imagination. Who says that my hunger will be satiated by devouring humanity? A faint smile twisted his lips. No, far from it. I do not intend to stop it consuming all of humanity. I'll feast on all the fallen gods of the dream realm, too, and every nightmare creature there is. Destroying only humans would be somewhat unfair, don't you think? So, I'll swallow all nightmare creatures as well, so that no one's feelings are hurt. His smile widened. After all, why leave it for forgotten God to destroy all of existence when I can consume it all myself? Then, by the time the dream realm is truly empty and only bones remain, when I am divine, I will challenge the seventh nightmare and face the forgotten God. Astarion's charming smile turned into a grin, a hint of a strange, eerie light igniting in his golden eyes. And I will devour him, as well. The Dreamspawn laughed. I'll feast on his flame, rise above divinity, and swallow the world. I'll bask in the endless darkness of the void. Then, I will devour the void, too, I'll try, at least. Wouldn't it be thrilling, to see what lies beyond? And feast on the beyond, of course. Shaking his head, Astarion looked at Nephis and Sunny affably. I see. Judging by your expressions, my plans sound overly ambitious. But wouldn't you agree? To live is to aspire. One has to have at least this much ambition to live a satisfying life in this dull, dying world. 2763 Endless growth. He's insane. He's actually unwell. That was the only thing Sunny could think of as he regarded Astarion with a frozen expression. But no, Sunny had already established that the Dreamspawn was of sound mind. It was just that nothing about the way he saw the world was within the bounds of what humans would consider normal, while his thinking process was completely free of all preconceptions that most people shared. After all, why would Astarion not want to devour humanity, the forgotten god, the entire world, and the everlasting void on top of that? The notion was no more preposterous than a random orphan from the outskirts of NQSC becoming an immortal demigod who commanded a legion of dead souls and ruled half of humanity. To someone who did not know Sunny very well, his strange story would sound like the ravings of a madman. Just like Astarion's confession had sounded just now. He truly is a worthy heir of Heart God. The god of growth and hunger. Astarion was more or less a flawless embodiment of insatiable hunger and unending growth. Nothing could ever satiate him, because his endless growth would always demand more fuel. So, in a sense, it was only natural that his ambitions went far beyond what Sunny and Nephis dared to want to achieve. Hell, just what had those damn Path of Ascension zealots done to raise Astarion into the eerie creature he was today? Was it their fault that he had turned out this way? Or had his mind become twisted as a result of their isolated colony in the dream realm being annihilated instead? No one knew much about the fate of that mysterious group. It had always been dismissively described as a fringe cult, but really, those supposed zealots were quite exceptional in their own way. They had been some of the first masters of humanity, just like Immortal Flame, Warden of Valor, and Nightwalker. One of them had claimed the lineage of Heart God, as well. It was just that their beliefs clashed with the emerging legacy hierarchy, so they decided to abandon the waking world entirely instead of being pushed out. That was how Astarion came to be born in the dream realm. Their citadel had fallen at some point, though, leaving him the only survivor. Come to think of it, Sunny did not know the details of how the Path of Ascension cult had been destroyed. However, there could have been only a few possible causes. The most probable cause was that their settlement had been overrun by nightmare creatures. Alternatively, it could have been attacked by humans instead. It was an established fact that the legacy regime had been born in bloodshed, after all, having eradicated all other rising factions. Would they have really left a fringe group like the Path of Ascension cult to develop in peace? Looking at Astarion now, Sunny realized that there was a third possible cause. The Dreamspawn could have slaughtered the Path of Ascension zealots himself. Considering his current disposition, it was not difficult to imagine that he would have began on his journey of endless growth by consuming the very group that had created him. There was no way to know. Sunny exhaled slowly. He wants to devour the void, huh? In short, Astarion wanted to become equal to the 7 great gods and declare war on the void, as well as on the harrowing creatures that dwelled within it, just like the gods had done once. In a sense, that war had never ended, so he would resume where the gods had left off, after inheriting their legacy. No wonder he was hunting down all the divine lineages. No, wait, Sunny suddenly felt a little dazed. The gods had not been able to destroy the void, they had only been able to seal it. But Astarion was not planning to succeed where they had failed by relying on the same amount of power. He was planning to attain power greater even than what the gods had wielded. After all, if he really did manage to consume all humans, all nightmare creatures, the forgotten god, and existence itself, then he would not simply become equal to one of the great gods. No, he would unite that which had been scattered all along, he would contain within himself all of the flame of desire. So, he would become as powerful as the source that had given birth to the gods, not the gods themselves. Seen in that light, his ambition to devour the void suddenly did not seem quite as baseless. He's still mad, though. Sunny sighed. Do you suppose that we will just let you gobble up humanity? Astarion turned and looked at Sunny silently for a few moments. Then, he asked in a pleasant tone. But what can you even do? Chuckling quietly, Astarion looked away. You can't kill me. You can't seal me, either, because to do so, you'll have to sacrifice the lives of the very same humans you want to protect from me. The sound of his voice was almost compassionate. Ah, but of course, by sparing them, you are only ensuring that I will get them all, eventually. Goodness gracious, I really do not envy you. You really are in a tight spot. It's almost like the whole situation has been designed by someone to trap you. He grinned. Looking at that grin, Nephis said in a calm tone. Do you really think that I will not burn all of Bastion down just to end you? A cold smile twisted her lips, as well. Do you think that there is anywhere in this world, in all worlds, that you can escape to if I decide to find you? She looked at him evenly. Go on, provoke me more. Let's see which one of us is ready to make sacrifices. Astarion remained silent, and Sunny did as well. At that moment, even he did not really know if she was bluffing. Eventually, Nephis shook her head. Your arrogance is impressive, but your bluff is too simple to call. You try to pretend that neither of us poses any danger to you, and yet you spent years doing nothing but hiding. You even felt so threatened by a mere saint as to ambush her. Most pitifully of all, your ambush failed. She frowned. Countless humans have been infected by the idea of you already, but how many have you been able to make your thralls? The human domain stands strong, and all your efforts to shake its foundations have amounted to nothing. Yes, you are devious and dangerous, but do you really think that you can win? Sunny was not sure if that confidence was a bluff, either. Astarion stared silently at her for a long while, as if unwilling to answer. Then, suddenly, he grinned. All right, it seems that you really are unwilling to make a deal with me. So, then, how about a bet, instead? 2764 bet against the devil. Sunny raised an eyebrow. A bet? Astarion shrugged. Well, I do hate to admit it, but the young lady is somewhat correct. Indoctrinating subjects of her domain has indeed proven to be more difficult than I anticipated. You really did a number on them, didn't you, Nephis? He shook his head. I don't even think that I could have done better myself. They truly are devoted, disgustingly so, really. As if you were already a goddess. Ah, but no matter. I'll get to them, eventually. The question is, what will the three of us do in the meantime? Raising a hand to rub his temple, Astarion said in a pensive tone. As I see it, there are two avenues to resolve our dispute. One is to make it a spectacle. You know, the usual repertoire of modernity, burning city rivers of blood, piles of corpses. You can unleash the full force of your aspects upon me, while I will escape and command my thralls to begin a campaign of terror and sabotage across both worlds, dealing devastating damage to humanity and undermining the public's confidence in your leadership. His expression soured. Naturally, that avenue will leave both parties unsatisfied. You will lose the lives of countless people you wish to protect, while I will lose the opportunity to devour those people. The drawbacks of this solution are substantial. Astarion fell silent, then continued as if nothing was the matter. The other avenue is a more civil manner of resolving a dispute. We simply do nothing. Sunny scoffed. Nothing. You expect us to do nothing? Astarion raised an eyebrow. Why not? Ah, but in this case, nothing is simply a manner of speech. What I meant to say was that we will limit ourselves to above-board measures, for a time, at least. After all, haven't you just proclaimed your confidence in the unity of the human domain? He smiled ominously. So, let us test it. Nephis frowned. What exactly do you mean? Astarion gave her a reserved look. It is just as I implied. I will endeavor to undermine the unity of your domain and make it mine, without resorting to bloodshed or acts of sabotage that can actually hurt it. You, meanwhile, can take measures to strengthen the devotion of your followers and prevent them from falling into my hands. It will be a war of public opinion, a war of ideas, if you will. Sunny and Nephis glanced at each other. At this point, it was clear that Astarion was trying to con them. It could hardly be called a con, because he was not even trying to hide his intentions. Naturally, it would be in everyone's best interest if the clash between the three supremes transpired without any blood being spilled. However, Astarion's powers were tailored for exactly that kind of warfare, for manipulating public opinion and propagating ideas that he deemed worthy. So, he would inevitably receive an advantage if they agreed to this temporary, deceptive ceasefire. It was just that Sunny and Nephis did not really have other options. Astarion had been right. At the moment, they could not contain him without causing destruction on a colossal scale, and that was not something either of them was ready to perpetrate, or at least ready to perpetrate just yet. The human domain, meanwhile, was indeed robust and strong. Neph's popularity was universal, and she was both revered and beloved by humans all across the two worlds. Some venerated her as a symbol of humanity, some regarded her as their best hope to survive the apocalypse, while some simply worshipped her like a goddess. That reverence was partially a result of a tremendous propaganda campaign that had spanned, in some shape or form, many decades, from the day Neph's grandfather became the first human to ascend until her rise to the throne of humanity. But it was also a result of Neph's own efforts and her radiant powers, which had saved countless lives, and were saving them still. Such a foundation was not simple to destroy, even for Astarion. Sunny had a sinking feeling that they would still end up on the losing end of a war of ideas, but that did not even really matter at the moment. Whether Astarion was trying to con them into accepting a losing proposition or not was not as important as the implications of accepting his bet. The main one being that they would receive more time. And if they wanted to find a way to regain control of the situation and deal with the Dreamspawn, time was something that they needed the most. Why does it feel like delaying the inevitable, then? Sunny sighed. He nodded subtly, signaling his opinion to Nephis. The corner of her mouth twitched slightly, betraying her displeasure, but she seemed to be of the same opinion as him, in the end. After a long bout of silence, Nephis finally spoke, her voice echoing in the vast hall. Are there any stakes to your bet, I wonder? Astarion simply laughed. Why, of course. If you win, I will be captured and sealed. If I win, you will become my thralls. Naturally, when the time comes, either side can decide not to honor the agreement, but the beautiful thing about this bet is that its very terms leave the loser no way out. It is not that different from a self-fulfilling prophecy. Sunny and Nephis looked at each other once again. They were in a dead end. Astarion might have presented his offer as a bet, but in truth, it was an ultimatum. All they could do was agree, for now. Once they regrouped and had a chance to discuss the situation, they could find a better solution. Kai, Effie, and Jet would be able to offer their opinions, as well, and Cassie would be with them again, too. Her advice might prove vital, considering how fixated Astarion was on eliminating her. Neffys grimaced. Fine, I'll accept your bet. The words were spoken. Astarion smiled, then gave her a mocking bow. A wise decision. In the silence that followed, Sunny asked in a disgruntled tone. Are you just going to stand there, then? The Dreamspawn chuckled. No. It's time for me to go, I think. Neffys raised an eyebrow. And where exactly will you go? Turning away, Astarion headed toward the exit with the same light steps. Well, now that I have revealed myself, I'll need a residence. I can't very well ask you to provide me with accommodations, can I? Luckily, I happen to own a wonderful property right here in Bastion. He looked over his shoulder and smiled. It's a scenic church on the edges of the city. Granted, all its worshippers have mysteriously vanished one night, but it's not a problem. Just as he was passing through the gate, he added in a pleasant tone. Something tells me that it will have a great number of new visitors soon. 2765 No one to trust. Astarion had left. However, even if he was gone, his presence stayed in the ivory tower, not the metaphysical kind of presence powerful awakened possessed, but simply the impression the weight of his existence left on the world. Sunny looked at Neffys and remained silent for a few moments. Neff. She inhaled deeply. I know. Letting out a sigh, Neffys gave him a composed look. At the moment, all we can do is deal with the pressing issues. One step at a time, Sunny, in order of priority. We must resolve the crises the Dreamspawn orchestrated first. Check up on Effie. Contact Jet and Kai, as well. She fell silent for a moment. Bring Cassie here. Neffys looked at him and added in a distant tone. If you don't mind. Sunny offered her a faint smile, then nodded and dissolved into the shadows. It did not take him long to reach Rivergate. Despite his worries, the battle had already concluded by then. The remains of what looked like a gargantuan great monster lay at the bottom of the dam, its eerie limbs reaching all the way to its battlements hundreds of meters above. Judging by how savagely the gargantuan body was mangled, Effie must have torn it apart with bare hands. Hiding in the shadows, Sunny pursed his lips. Really, now, what did I give her that spear for? The chain breaker was looming in the sky above the dam, while Effie herself seemed to have disembarked. He cast his shadow sense outward, searching for her. As it turned out, she was close by, standing near the person in charge of the Rivergate hydroelectric plant with her arms crossed. Beth was busy shouting out orders. Check the turbines. Make sure that the water doesn't flood the generator chamber. And by the dead gods, somebody, get Quentin. He has to repair the cracks before the entire dam collapses. Letting out an infuriated huff, she looked up at Effie and added in an exasperated tone. Saint Athena, thank you for your prompt assistance, really, but you are not going to leave that thing lying there, are you? It's blocking the outflow channel. So, can you transform again and drag the carcass away? Just a few hundred meters will do. No, better yet, chop it into little pieces so that my awakened could transport them with their own strength. Processing the carcass of a great one was a logistical nightmare unless a saint or two were at hand, so Sunny could understand the urgency in her voice. However, Beth was going to be disappointed. Effie was needed elsewhere, so he could not allow her to waste time here. Becoming a shadow, Sunny made himself into a human once more, this time, simply by using shadow manifestation instead of manifesting a true incarnation. He changed his facial features and appearance in the process, as well as contained his presence within himself, so that none of it could leak. Getting the skin tone to look natural was a bit difficult, but he managed just fine. In the end, a man who looked nothing like Sunny emerged from the shadows and walked up to Effie, giving her a polite bow. Saint Athena, I bring a message from the immortal flame. Your presence is urgently needed in Bastion. She looked at him with a confused frown. Who? Then, her eyes widened a little. She remained silent for a few moments, then asked in a wary tone. Did you say urgently? Sunny nodded. The matter is of grave importance. You must return post-haste. Effie gave him a long look, then turned away and bellowed. Everyone back aboard. We are returning to Bastion. Beth stared at her with a startled expression. Returning? Who is going to get rid of that ugly thing, then? Sunny spared her glance, thinking about the times they had spent together in Antarctica. It was not that he particularly missed the chain of nightmares, but being a complete stranger to her made him feel wistful. Sorry, Beth. Apologies, Chief Bethany. Someone will be sent to assist with the removal and processing of the carcass soon. In the meantime, please direct your ascended specialist to ascertain the potential value of salvageable material. With that, he followed Effie to the chain breaker. Soon enough, the flying ship was soaring through the sky, rushing back to Bastion. The firekeepers seemed to be in high spirits, celebrating a swift victory. None of them knew that the world had fundamentally changed in their short absence. That the human domain they had been defending so fervently was under immense threat, poised to be completely destroyed. Sunny envied their ignorance. At the same time, he was studying their faces quietly. He had known these people since the Forgotten Shore, and there was no one in the world more devoted to Nephis than they. But, still, how many of them would fall victim to Astarion's powers one day soon? It was difficult to imagine, but he was slowly coming to terms with the fact that nobody could be trusted in this stark new reality. The Dreamspawn was simply too powerful, and his powers were too insidious. Maybe taking away the trust people had in each other was the first step in his ghastly plan to undermine the human domain. What the hell happened, Sunny? Effie's voice sounded even, but she was visibly anxious. No surprise, her family resided in Bastion, after all. Hearing that her immediate presence was required because of something that had happened there must have rattled her. That reminds me, we must assign additional protection to Little Ling. Considering how interested in the Dreamspawn's Astarion seems to be, there is no telling what he'll do. Sunny sighed. What happened? Well, we had a guest at the Ivory Tower. The more he spoke, the more Effie's expression seemed to dim. Soon enough, the shining surface of the Mirror Lake appeared on the horizon. Almost at the same time, a different incarnation of Sunny arrived at Bastion through a radiant dream gate. That one was carrying the unconscious, bloodied figure of Cassie in his arms. 2766 A bitter reversal. By the time Effie and Sunny reached the Ivory Tower, the rest were already there. They had seen the unusually lively streets of Bastion on the way. The growing crowd of prominent champions of the human domain gathered on the pier of the castle, waiting for a ferry to come and take them to the Ivory Island, where, without a doubt, representatives of the Immortal Flame Clan would shine a light on the preposterous rumors quickly spreading across the world. The rumors that Astarion, the Dreamspawn, was back from the dead and claiming his place as the third sovereign of humanity. Damn it all, things had gone much more smoothly when Mordred suddenly attained supremacy. Now, everything was in chaos. The Firekeepers were supposed to deal with the turmoil, but with one of their leaders gravely wounded and the other busy treating her wounds, they fell into inaction. None of them knew who Astarion was, anyway. Because simply knowing about his existence had seemed perilous once. And it was. Everyone either already knew or would soon know about him, though, and therefore everyone was already in danger. How is she? Cassie was laying on the bed in Neph's personal quarters on the highest floor of the Ivory Tower, while Nephis herself was kneeling beside her, soft light slowly disappearing from under her skin. She gave Sunny a somber look. He could see the answer himself. Some of Cassie's wounds seemed to have closed, but the gaping hole where he left eye had been remained exactly the same. The bleeding had stopped, at least. Her bloodied face looked incredibly pale in the bright sunlight pouring into the windows. As she lay there, vulnerable and unconscious, Cassie seemed younger than usual. No, actually, she finally looked her age. Not that age still held the same meaning for beings like Sunny, Nephis, and her. Both physically and mentally, they were more or less ageless. I managed to heal most of her wounds. But her eye simply refuses to recover. It is as if it was never there. As if missing an eye is the natural state of her body, so restoring it goes beyond the concept of healing. Casting a gaze at her friend, Nephis gritted her teeth and said, her voice shaking with fury. I have no idea how he did that. I do not know how he prevented me from healing her remotely, either. Ah, he really prepared that ambush well. Sunny frowned, but not well enough. Otherwise, Cassie would be missing both eyes right now. Nephis looked at him with a hint of misery in her eyes, which made his heart ache a little, then nodded somberly. Yes. She remained silent for a moment, then sighed and looked to Kai. Kai, can you ask one of the Firekeepers to bring us water? She turned back to Cassie and brushed a few stray strands of bloodied hair away from her face. She shouldn't have to stay that way. Kai and Jet were there with them, as well. They had arrived with the second incarnation of Sunny from Ravenheart via the Dream Gate, and were now standing behind Nephis in grim silence. When Kai left, she turned to Jet. What is the situation? Jet lingered for a moment. The news has already reached the waking world. We are suppressing the spread on the network, but we can't stop people from talking. The gin is out of the bottle, Neffys. Well, you must already know that. By tomorrow, 2 days at best, all of humanity will know that the Dreamspawn has returned. So, we can't cover it up. The best we can do is frame the story in a way that benefits us. Neffys looked at her with a dark expression. Only we can't, because he won't be sitting idly, either. He'll make sure to spread his own version of the story to cement his starting position. Then, he will start an information campaign to discredit us. Jet pursed her lips. He might be a supreme, but we still control the infrastructure. All the means of directing the flow of information are in our hands. Sunny shook his head. No, the Dreamspawn himself is a means of controlling the flow of information. The most powerful one there is. He is a supreme whose aspect is all about controlling thoughts and emotions. We cannot prevent him from poisoning our people with his ideas. He paused somberly. All we can do is inoculate them against the poison with ideas of our own. Maybe. Effie, who had been silent the entire time, finally spoke. This is not our area of expertise, though. Isn't it too arrogant to think that we can beat that monster at his own game? Sunny and Neffys both looked at her. Eventually, it was Neffys who spoke, her voice low. Arrogance has nothing to do with it. It's just that we have no other choice. We have been left with no other choice. So what's the point of cowering in fear? Effie grimaced. Can't we just lure him somewhere and turn him into a puddle of blood? Oh, and then feed that puddle to some unholy horror. Even if he is immortal, that should keep him occupied for a while. Sunny sighed. We can't. He is too cunning to walk into a trap. He is a human, after all, despite all his proclamations. And fighting humans is so much more difficult than fighting nightmare creatures. Even if we do manage to lure him away from human cities, though, it's unclear whether we can defeat him in battle. Or rather, defeat him before he can escape. Effie frowned. You killed Anvil and Kisong all right. Sunny shook his head. We had been preparing for that battle for years. We had usurped their citadels, stolen the loyalty of their people, and attacked them unexpectedly when the power of their domains was lower than ever. He paused for a moment, thinking how eerily that described what Astarion must have been planning. Swallowing his unease, Sunny continued. Quote, While they were already exhausted from fighting each other, no less. They had not even entertained the thought that we might attain natural supremacy, either. But we did. By then, the outcome of the battle was already a moot point. Kai had returned with a basin of water and a clean cloth. Neffys wetted the cloth and washed the blood off Cassie's face, speaking quietly. We are strong, much stronger than Astarion, most likely you. But strength alone does not decide the outcome of battles. Do not make the mistake of underestimating him. He has been supreme decades longer than we have, after all. He wields 4 divine lineages, as well. Heart God, War God, Storm God, and Beast God. He inherited the power of all 4, no less. Maybe that could explain some of his unexplainable powers. Neffys sighed. It would have been good if we could join forces with the King of Nothing. But he made his unwillingness to ally with us clear. In fact, he completely isolated himself in the Hollow Mountains, avoiding all contact with humans. A crooked grin twisted her lips. He must have known that humans would become a liability once the Dreamspawn returns. At best, they are hostages that he uses to manipulate his enemies. At worst, they are his willing thralls, infecting everyone who comes in contact with them with his disease. Mordred had hidden himself in the mist of the Hollow Mountains, eventually cutting all contact with humanity. Of course, Sunny did not think that he was merely planning to hide from Astarion with his tail tucked. The bastard was definitely brewing his own plan. He had to know how meaningless hiding from Astarion was, at the very least. Sooner or later, the insatiable monster would come for him, as well. After meeting Astarion, Sunny could suddenly see where many facets of Mordred's personality had come from, some of his habits and mannerisms, even. One had been raised by the other, after all. It was amazing how Mordred suddenly seemed far less of an unhinged monster when compared to his former captor and guardian. Who knew that he would seem sensible one day? In any case, there was no point in expecting assistance from Mordred. We still can. Before he could finish the sentence, Neffys interrupted him by raising a hand. In front of her, on the bloodied bed, Cassie let out a quiet groan and then slowly opened her one remaining eye. 2767 End of Mercy. Cassie opened her one remaining eye, however, Sunny knew that she could not see anything, still. For a brief moment, her pale face twisted in an expression of pain and fear. It was only after she activated her awakened ability that it relaxed a little, betraying her disoriented state. Cassie. Nefis called her name quietly, holding one of her hands. You are in the ivory tower. You are safe. Have you shut down your mental network during the attack? You can activate your marks again now. Sunny walked closer, lowering himself to the floor near the bed. It's just you, me, Nefis, Effie, Kai, and Jet here. How do you feel? Cassie remained motionless for a few long moments, then drew a deep breath and sat up, using Nefis for support. Her voice sounded weak. My mom. He hesitated a little. She is safe, too. But she seemed out of sorts. So, one of my incarnations brought her to the quarantine facility. She is still under observation there. Jet added from behind him. Elv also sent someone to recover your father. He is in protective custody now. Cassie nodded slowly. Then, her hand hesitantly reached toward her face, where a gaping wound had replaced the gorgeous blue ocean of her left eye. Her fingers hovered just above the wound, trembling slightly. Nefis gritted her teeth. I haven't been able to heal it yet. We'll find a way, soon. Don't worry. Cassie did not respond. She remained silent for a while, then lowered her hand, exploring the changed geography of her face with a gentle touch. Eventually, she asked in a hoarse voice, what happened? Tell me everything. No. That will take too long. She turned to Sunny, a silent question written in the subtle shadows on her face. He nodded simply, giving her permission. Go ahead. Cassie's remaining eye drew him like a boundless abyss, and as she activated her transcendent ability, Sunny felt something pouring over his memories. He saw flashes of past events before settling on what had happened after he received Cassie's call for help. Before he could fully relive the memory, though, Cassie suddenly let out a piercing scream and fell back to the bed, clutching at the left side of her face. Crimson blood flowed from between her fingers, painting the sheets red. What's the matter? Kai stepped forward, shocked. Nefis leaned forward, her hands igniting with healing light. Sunny just remained frozen in place, powerless to do anything. Then again, Nef's flames did not seem to have any effect, either. Cassie's scream turned into a tortured groan, then into a deafening silence. She stayed quiet for a while, gritting her teeth in pain. Then, slowly, she lowered her hands, revealing the bleeding wound of her missing eye. It's all right. Cassie seemed to stare at the ceiling, her expression slowly becoming still. It's all right, a little bleeding won't kill me. She paused for a moment, then asked. So he came here, to the Ivory Island? Sunny and Nefis glanced at each other. He studied Cassie for a brief moment, then said cautiously. Yes, but, can you still use your transcendent ability? A pale smile twisted Cassie's lips. Somewhat. She remained silent for a while, then added quietly. Barely. It's difficult, with only one eye. The strain is too severe for me to handle, at least without causing myself harm. A somber silence hung in the brightly lit hall. It was good that Cassie had not lost her transcendent ability completely. However, if she had to harm herself so severely every time she used it, it was as good as gone. Which meant that their only way of curing Astarion's thralls was effectively gone, too. Perhaps Cassie would be willing to sacrifice herself in order to cleanse the minds of especially vital people, should they fall victim to the Dreamspawn, but Sunny was not sure that he would be willing to let her, especially not for such marginal gains. He suppressed the desire to curse and stood up with a sigh. It's all right, we will simply find another way. Now that everyone in the world knew Astarion's name, the number of thralls was bound to explode. The quarantine facility and Cassie would not have been able to handle the flood of infected. Anyway, so, Sunny and Nefis would have had to resort to more radical means of containing them regardless. Cassie exhaled slowly. The thrall who attacked me in the lounge bar, he was a master. There were others, as well. Her expression remained still. We have only encountered enthralled awakened before. But now that the hunger domain has sufficiently grown, the Dreamspawn seems to be capable of claiming ascended, too. She remained silent for a few moments, then added in an even tone. The ambush could only have been prepared in advance. I was supposed to meet Wake of Ruin, he was the one who had chosen the location, as well. There might be thralls embedded into his immediate circle of subordinates, but we can't exclude the possibility that saints are becoming susceptible to the Dreamspawn's influence either. Jet looked at her with a dark expression, lingered for a while, and then said somberly. I will investigate core. Cassie nodded slowly. In any case, it is more important than ever to keep our strongest vassals confident in the authority of the immortal flame throne. Seishan and her sisters, Morgan, the White Feather Clan, the Saints of Night, and others. They must be waiting for an explanation. Time is of the essence, so we must reassure them first. She turned her head, facing the members of the cohort. You must address the population immediately after that, Neff. You cannot reveal the Dreamspawn's true nature and goals, though, doing so will only cause widespread fear and panic, which will weaken the integrity of the human domain in turn. We must choose our words carefully. She took a deep breath, drops of blood still rolling down her face. This bet he offered you, we cannot win it. He will inevitably defeat our efforts to prevent him from stealing the human domain. However, we can slow him down. She paused for a moment. And using the time we gain by slowing him down, we will find a way to destroy him. Cassie gritted her teeth, then pushed herself into a sitting position once more. I will command the Fire Keepers to start preparations for receiving high-ranking guests. I will send a message to the Saints of the Human Domain, as well, announcing an emergency council. There is no time to waste. Neffys gently prevented her from standing up. The rest can do that, and more. You should rest and recover for now. Take care of yourself first. Cassie faced her with an unreadable expression. She remained silent for a few moments, then said, I am not a cripple yet, Neff. Then, Cassie softly pushed her hand away and staggered to her feet. And none of us has time to rest. The Dreamspawn has returned, so I don't need to tell you, a war for the survival of humanity has begun. Even if there are no armies marching to destroy each other, yet, you know that this war will be far more ferocious and harrowing than the war in Godgrave. You cannot afford to pity me. You cannot afford to pity anyone, or show anyone mercy. Cassie faced them somberly, the crimson blood on her face contrasting sharply against the vivid blue intensity of her remaining eye. She exhaled slowly, and then said in an even tone, and I shall not show anyone mercy, either. 2768 Bloodied Message. Ah, I remember that pain. The being who had been Song of the Fallen once almost lost herself in the torment of the dark, dreary memory. The iron stench of blood, the warmth of sunlight shining upon her bruised face, the texture of the blood-soaked bedsheets, the familiar sense of her friends and companions. She remembered it all now. In fact, even if she wished to, unless she wished to, she would never be able to forget a single excruciating detail. She knew now how the calamity had begun, and who the foe was. So, these memories were of no significance anymore, the memories of what followed were more important. Perhaps they could explain how she had ended up in this peculiar and eerie state. So, she wanted to abandon the memories of that day and turn her attention elsewhere. But before that, she could not help but pull one last recollection closer. That memory was not at all important, in the grand scheme of things. But it was important to her. In that memory, Cassie returned to the waking world after leaving it bloodied and broken. She had left in the evening and returned on the cusp of dawn. The streets of NQSC were still dark, and the desolate expanse of the abandoned outskirts was utterly lightless. Not that it made any difference to her, who spent most of her life in the darkness. Cassie exited the PTV with a tentative step. She had washed away the blood and donned a new attire, appearing no different from her usual self. The empty socket where her left eye had been was pulsing with a dull pain, but its gaping hole was hidden behind a blindfold. Nobody would know that she had been maimed unless she took the blindfold off. Cassie was blind and had not perceived the world with her own eyes for more than a decade. Her eyes were useless to her, so losing one should not have affected her much. And yet, she felt its absence. Without her left eye, she felt peculiarly unbalanced. Cassie was hurting, but far worse than the pain was the cold recognition that she had been maimed. How will I show my face to people? The question startled her. Without the protection of the blindfold, everyone would see how gruesomely she had been brutalized. There was no shame in that, but Cassie almost smiled. I guess I have some vanity left. After all, she knew, naturally, that she was beautiful, had been beautiful, at least. She had assumed that it was of little importance to her, and she had definitely never put any meaning into her looks. But now, Cassie realized that they mattered to her far more than she had thought. Perhaps it was because she could not see, but she cared about how people saw her deeply. Schooling her expression, Cassie entered the abandoned factory. She did not want to appear rattled to the staff of the quarantine facility. To them, she was like a messenger of their goddess. A saintess in the true meaning of the word, not the rank designation brought upon by the spell. If a messenger of heaven appeared bloodied and afraid, how would simple mortals feel? Passing the security checks and entering the quarantine facility, Cassie soon stumbled upon a familiar face. Despite the early hour, awakened Yutra was dragging an alloy crate somewhere. Naturally, it was a crate of synthetic beer, and he was dragging it to the generator room, where he always hid it. Cassie stopped, listening to the sounds Yutra made quietly. He had managed to replace the beer every time she wiped his memories, never breaking the cycle. Cassie had even joined the Tenacious Awakened and his drinking buddies in the generator room once to sample the cheap beer, not that any of them would remember it. And despite that, she still had no idea where he procured the synthetic swill, let alone how he managed to procure it without fault each time. It was actually quite astonishing. Yutra, meanwhile, finally noticed her presence. Saint Cassia, ma'am. He stood straight, looking at her with admiration and awe, as if he met a living deity. That expression of his never changed. Cassie forced herself to smile. Good morning, awakened Yutra. He scratched the back of his head shyly. Oh, is it morning? It's hard to tell here, underground. Cassie remained silent for a while, looking at herself through his eyes. She felt deeply regretful that she could not see his face instead. Her hand hovered close to her waist, as if wanting to rest on something. But then, Cassie froze. Oh, right, quiet dancer is gone. The loss of her trusty rapier hit her more than the loss of her eye. She slowly made a fist, then relaxed her hand and lowered it. Cassie had told Nefis that she would show no mercy to anyone, and that included showing mercy to herself. The world did not afford them the luxury of being sentimental at the moment. Her smile dimmed a little. Actually, awakened Yutra, I was wondering if you could do me a favor. Cassie sensed the muscles of his face move, forming an expression of surprise. A favor? How can I mean yes, Saint Cassia. Just say the word. She nodded in gratitude. Could you please gather all the staff in the main production hall? I have some news to share. Yutra threw a furtive glance at his crate of beer, then nodded energetically. Of course, I'll gather them right now. Abandoning the beer, the man hurried away. Cassie, meanwhile, remained in place. The smile slowly drained from her face. Soon enough, she was standing in front of an alloy door. Behind it, the staff of the quarantine facility was waiting in the darkness of the empty production hall, whispering as they excitedly discussed what kind of new song of the fallen had brought. Cassie inhaled deeply, then exhaled, then inhaled again. After a while, she put on a confident expression and opened the door. Dozens of eyes immediately aimed intense gazes at her. All of these people had been thralls once, and all of them were freed from the jaws of the Dreamspawn by her. Then, they volunteered to stay and help her treat other patients. After all the time they had spent together, she knew them all well. Yutra, Tegrat, Rit, and all the rest. Cassie faced them with a smile. Greetings, everyone. Today, I have an announcement to make. She fell silent, the benevolent smile glued to her face. Then, it widened a little. First of all, I want to sincerely thank each of you for the work you've performed under my command. Your conduct has been stellar, and your contributions to the safety of the human domain are deeply appreciated. It has been a personal pleasure of mine to lead such an exemplary group of individuals. The members of the staff listened to her with rapt attention. There were a few cheerful smiles and excited whispers, but most seemed shy and embarrassed. Cassie forced herself to keep smiling. So, it is with pride and satisfaction that I announce the conclusion of our mission. The threat we've been battling is thwarted. You have all done well. There is no need for this quarantine facility anymore, so you can all go home. The staff members fell silent. Cassie lowered her head and sighed quietly. Then, she repaired her expression and faced them once more. Senior members of the Firekeepers will arrive shortly to handle the handover and begin decommissioning this facility. In a few days, you'll be free to return to your families and enjoy the fruits of your service. That is all. Congratulations. She could not treat the enthralled anymore. So, there was no point in maintaining the quarantine facility anymore. She could not treat the staff members either, so they had to be separated from the thralls. So, she was going to set them free. That was the least she could do, after all they had sacrificed for the human domain. Cassie cast one last gaze at the production hall, through the eyes of the awakened gathered there, of course. Yutra was confused and baffled. Standing by his side, Tegrat seemed excited. Rit was frowning, like she usually did. There was nothing she could do for these people anymore. Bowing awkwardly, Cassie turned around and left before they could ask any questions. She deactivated the marks she had left on them, as well, leaving herself alone in the darkness. Without anyone to escort her and lacking the support of the quiet dancer, Cassie had to navigate the quarantine facility by memory. Luckily, her memory was absolute, so she remembered each crack on its walls perfectly. Things always changed in a place where so many people worked and lived, though, so she bumped into a few things on the way, regardless, or rather, she would have if not for her awakened ability, which allowed her to experience these stumbles before they actually happened. Tracing a cement wall with her fingers, Cassie walked down a dark corridor and stopped in front of a thick door of a patient cell. She remained standing in front of that door for a while, as well, gathering her courage. Finally, she unlocked the door and walked inside. A familiar voice came from the darkness. "Cassie. Thank the gods. I was so worried." A weak smile appeared on her face. "I'm all right, Mom. You don't have to worry anymore." For the first time in a long while, Cassie felt happy to be blind. She did not think she could have endured the sigh of her mother locked in a barren patient cell. She hesitated for a few moments, then said in a bright tone. "Dad is also fine. Oh, our home might need extensive repairs, though." Her mother suppressed a gasp. "Home? Who cares about our home right now, Cassie?" Cassie walked slowly to the cot and sat near her mother, sensing a familiar, calming scent. "Right, who cares? I am wealthy enough to buy us a new home. In fact, why don't we all settle in Bastion? What do you think, Mom?" Her mother did not respond, though. Instead, what met her was an unsettling silence. Then, a shaking hand reached and pulled down her blindfold. Cassie heard a sob. "Oh, baby." She caught her mom's hand, squeezing it in hopes of sharing warmth. She did not know which one of them needed warmth, though. How could this have happened? Her mom's voice was brimming with pain and anguish. "It's terrible." Cassie smiled weakly. Her mother, meanwhile, continued in the same pained, loving tone. "It's terrible that you still have your second eye, Cassie. Didn't Lord Astarion want to take it? Oh, baby, you should have let him rip it out." Cassie's lips trembled. She remained silent for a while, holding her mother's hand. Eventually, she asked, "Should I have?" Her mother answered in a stern voice. "Of course. Lord Astarion only wants the best of you. For all of us." Cassie smiled. "All right." She inhaled deeply and then turned a little, casting the unseeing gaze of her one remaining eye at her mother. "Don't worry anymore, Mom. It's all going to be all right." As the light in the cell seemed to dim, the beautiful blue depths of her eye changed, and as her mother froze, falling into a trance, red drops rolled down Cassie's cheek. They fell to the floor and scattered in the dust, disappearing. But more drops fell soon. 2769 Good omen. Cassie tore herself away from the memory, gasping for breath even if she did not seem to possess lungs. A piercing pain was rending her mind apart, radiating from her empty eye socket, even if she did not seem to possess eyes. Arg! She writhed in the dark ocean of memories, pushing them away with the tendrils of her will. However, in doing so, she touched far more of them than she had intended. Instantly, a chaotic mess of memories was absorbed into her being, overwhelming her. She saw an abominable mass of flesh overgrowing a defiled city under the golden light of 7 suns. The ground opening up to unleash torrents of fire upon a crumbling world, an ocean of darkness flowing into the fractures from a vast, harrowing, broken silhouette that obscured the horizon in the distance. The roaring thunderclaps of railgun salvos shaking the great alloy wall of a polar city as a vast horde of abominations threatened to drown it, melting under the hail of turret fire. A radiant being with 3 eyes falling in an unfathomable battle that tore apart the sky, its body piercing realm boundaries as it plummeted down to the ground like a shooting star. A young man piercing another youth's heart with an iron knife, then violently throwing him to the floor of a pitiful wooden hut. A hideous creature screaming as it dropped a stunning eye from its beak, its colossal wings beating in frenzy. And then, Cassie lost herself in an old memory that had a familiar scent. The sweltering, humid scent of the jungle. In the memory, Cassie was gazing down upon her situ from the sacrificial platform of her great temple. She was Quetzalcoatl, the winged serpent, the god king of Mictlan. Her city was vast and prosperous, her people never knew hunger, and her mighty asuras were numerous, standing guard over the heart bone of the sun killer as the forces of doom encroached upon his corpse. She had been born as one of the divine children who carried the blood of the sun in their veins. Most of her siblings had perished a long time ago, but she remained. When she was a teenage boy, she ascended the sky bridge and passed the trial of the White Abyss, spending a month in emotionless meditation as the world burned around her. As a young man, she led hunters into the jungle and hunted monsters of corruption. Later, she abandoned the persona of a divine child and took on the mantle of the king. The world had been different then. Her brother Inti had not created the Asuras yet, and Shatana the traitor had not cast the veil upon the white abyss yet. The ash had not been as deep as it was Tota Yu, and ash nomads had still traveled the desolate land. Most importantly, Doom had not discovered the Sun Realm yet. And neither had the nightmare spell. Cassie turned away from the dark landscape of her domain, distant sunlight pouring through the cracks in the heart bone far away. On the altar in front of her, a great beast was straining against the sorcery that held it in place, trying to crush the world with its will. Its will did not matter, though, because it could never overcome her own. She smiled and raised a bone knife, the same knife she had used once to ascend the sky bridge. The sacrificial beast fell to her blade like numerous before it, surrendering its corruption to the cold embrace of death. Hot blood washed over her hands, and the nightmare spell whispered into her ear, "You have slain a great beast, fallen wanderer of the sky." The creature's blood tried to flow to the floor. Its soul tried to dissipate into the ether, and its shadow tried to leave for the realm of death. However, there was no escaping Cassie. Raising a hand, she absorbed the blood, the soul, and the shadow as well. She absorbed the gargantuan corpse, too, making it a part of herself. Her skin rippled and settled in place, just as supple and flawless as always. Raising her hand, she painted a red line on her face and closed her eyes. The AED roars of the vast crowd that had gathered at the base of the temple washed over her. The silence of her transcendent priests washed over her, as well. Cassie exhaled slowly, then opened her eyes. "What does the omen say, my king?" The voice of her high priest could not help but betray a hint of nervousness. Cassie smiled joyfully. "I saw light shining upon Mictlan." The faces of her priests paled with horror. "I saw the heart bone shattered by a tower made of white stone. I saw snow fall upon the jungle, then disappear in a hell of white flame. I saw a shadow rise from the surface of the bone and an angel descend from the white abyss to extinguish a storm of steel and drain a river of blood, and kill each other." She laughed. "Most importantly, I saw the seed of our destruction bloom in black water." "Ah, it is going to rain soon." The high priest fell to his knees. What does that omen mean, my king?" Cassie looked at him with a benevolent smile. She remained silent for a while, then spoke in a soft tone. "Fear not, child, the omen shows that the Sun Killer will never overcome the white abyss. It is a promise of good fortune." She lied, of course. These children did not even remember the world before the nightmare spell and the doom it had brought. To them, Mictlan had always been a land of mighty warriors and supreme monarchs who held corruption at bay. But she had seen the ash nomads fall. She had seen the cities of the pillar bones burn. She had seen the vermin of the jungle grow more powerful with each generation. She saw the nightmares bloom, bringing with them untold horrors from beyond the boundary of the Sun Realm. She knew that Mictlan was doomed. Unless she and others like her cast away their false titles and became true gods, of course. And now, she knew how to do it. "Hear my command, children of the sun." She looked at the sprawling vista of her vast city. "When the rain comes and floods the jungle, we will set out on a journey. Send news to other kings. Quetzalcoatl is calling them to Heart Lake. The time has come to thwart the doom, once and for all. Or die trying." 2770 Gods of Godgrave. In the end, they all came. The winged serpent, the leopard, the ape, the hummingbird, the otter, even the eagle, who lived on the border between light and darkness. Only the eel was absent, having been banished into the darkness of the Spinacia for her mother's crime. They came from the heart bone, the cage bone, the pillar bone, the cross bone, and even from the shattered skull. They came from all domains of Mictlan, answering the call of its most ferocious ruler. Now that the rains had unleashed a deluge, the jungle became a complicated network of roaring rivers, with great waterfalls plummeting from the height in a silver radiance of sunlight. Because of that, traveling across the jungle had become easier. Quetzalcoatl arrived at the head of a great army of Asuras. The jungle quaked under their steps, and the corrupted monsters that dwelled under its scarlet canopy were slaughtered as they passed. The otter arrived at the bow of a mighty warboat, a fleet of enchanted vessels flooding the web of rivers behind her. The leopard came alone, the jungle moving and crawling away to clear a path for his light steps. The ape and the hummingbird brought their own Asuras, the former nimble and lumbering, the latter boasting a unique wing design. The eagle, who was known to be mad, had traveled across the surface and entered the heart bone through a fissure, falling with the water before spreading his vast wings. They all came to the shores of Heart Lake, looking across the water at the Temple of the Sun. For some, like Quetzalcoatl, this radiant temple had a special meaning. After all, it was here that the divine children like him had been raised once, a long time ago. To others, Heart Lake was merely a place where all the rivers of heart bone came together when the rain fell. Therefore, it was the conflux of Mictlan, as well as its foundation. The temple that stood in the middle of Heart Lake was the neutral territory where the rulers of the Sun Realm met when there was a need for them to sue for peace or hold council. No one dared to stain the sanctity of the Sun Temple, both because of what it represented and because of the being who dwelled inside. The rulers left their armies on the shores of Heart Lake and entered the temple in stark solitude. There, the Fallen One waited for them in his dark vestments, towering above the kings and queens of Mictlan as if they were children. His face was obscured by a deep hood, and the intricate silver armor encased his arms and slender torso. 12 gray wings rose behind his back, casting shadows upon them. Welcome, those who carry the flame. The Fallen One was unlike them, humans. He was the last of the Sky People, who had once basked in the splendor of the sun, before the sun died and devoured the heaven, creating the white abyss and annihilating all his kin. Quetzalcoatl was old enough to remember the world before the nightmare spell, but the Fallen One was far more ancient. He had witnessed the world before the gods died, before the mortal realms were swallowed by the doom, before the white abyss existed, and before the Sun Killer fell, the great hollows of his bones becoming Mictlan. The Fallen One was older than the world itself. Older than the world that they knew, at least. He had also tended Quetzalcoatl and his siblings in this temple as a servant, raising them to inherit the Sun Realm. The temple was both his home and his prison, since the Fallen One was sealed within and forbidden from stepping outside. Why have you called us here, Winged Serpent? Quetzalcoatl glanced at the rulers of Mictlan, sensing 5 oceans of tyrannical will bearing down on him. Of course, he remained undaunted. They were the strongest and most ferocious warriors of the Sun Realm, but he was the most terrifying among them, and one who ruled the largest domain. The youngest of them had been born after the nightmare spell descended upon Mictlan. The rest had already been walking the path of ascension when the spell first whispered to them, and climbed to the throne of supremacy with its help. But in any case of their age, they all knew the truth. He raised his chin. The gods are dead, and the mortal realms have fallen to corruption. Now, doom encroaches upon the divine realms. The Sun Realm is the first to bloom with the seeds of nightmare, but it won't be the last. The doom devours all, and only those who are blind believe in the promise of a glorious future. People easily believed lies. Worse even, they were easily led to wrong conclusions by vague truths. But those who were supreme could not allow themselves to be deceived. Mictlan is strong and fearsome. Unlike the rest of the divine realms, we have always been at war with the corruption, living under the constant siege of the jungle. Ours has always been the sacred duty of keeping the Sun Killer from being reborn, and therefore, we have always been warriors. He paused and gave them a ferocious look. Mictlan gave birth to myriad heroes in the past, and after the nightmare spell was cast upon our people, their number only swelled. More than that, we possess the sorcery of creating the Asuras, which make each of our awakened capable of fighting creatures far more powerful than they are. We wield myriad other sorceries, as well. His gaze turned heavy, but all of this is meaningless in the face of the encroaching doom. Make no mistake, the armies of Asuras will fail us. The walls of our fortresses will fall. The thrones that you are so proud of will be shattered, and one day soon, the scarlet vines of the jungle will bury our temples under mountains of rot. Quetzalcoatl inhaled deeply, and then smiled. Unless new gods are born,